Imagine a mass rally at night. An exuberant crowd waves flags and lights, hanging on every word of a bombastic leader. The scene is both exhilarating and sinister because we know the man at the podium thrives on fear, lies, and power. Yet the crowd is intoxicated, they believe he can save them. They see a hero, a cold eye sees a dangerous con artist. This is the paradox we must confront. I remember the first time I noticed this. An old colleague confided that she still defended a scandal-plagued politician she felt was honest deep down, despite evidence to the contrary. She seemed ashamed of admitting it, but the pull was real. How could rational people fall for glaring lies? Tonight we'll dissect this mystery. The thesis is simple yet disturbing. Our very nature makes us crave and justify tyrants. Drawing on political psychology and the dark philosophy of Arthur Schopenhauer, we'll examine why crowds cling to corrupt leaders, even when it hurts them. In this video, we'll look at 3 key dimensions of this phenomenon: psychological comfort, collective fantasy, and bitter consequences, then zoom out to see the historical cycle. By the end, I'll challenge you to confront your own biases. If you find this unsettling, as I did, or strangely relevant, let me know below. Hit like or subscribe if you're ready to stare into the darkness. But be warned, these are not comforting truths. The farther we go, the more we realize why Schopenhauer called human nature pessimistic and how our blind will leads us into the lion's den. We start with the most basic factor: fear and desire for protection. In insecure times, people crave a strong hand on the wheel. History is full of desperate citizens who traded liberty for a promise of safety. Politicians sell themselves as bodyguards against the storms ahead. Psychologists note that being strong and decisive is highly attractive in a leader. We instinctively feel safer with someone who looks confident, even if that confidence is just arrogant bluster. In fact, research shows many people confuse narcissism and aggression with competence. As the Psychology Today blog Cutting Edge Leadership explains, we value strong, confident leaders. Many people believe that bullying, tyrannical individuals are the best types of leaders, often because they were raised to admire tough tactics. In other words, the same instinct that makes us seek shelter in a hero also makes us cheer on the bully. When a man shouts, parades uniforms, points an angry finger, we may feel a primitive thrill, even as our logical mind recoils. Fear is only part of it. The philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer would say our inner drive, what he calls the will, relentlessly seeks to escape pain and boredom. Every moment of anxiety or dullness fuels this craving for distraction and meaning. Schopenhauer famously warned that the 2 enemies of human happiness are pain and boredom. When life feels empty or fearful, we latch onto anything that promises excitement or relief. A mercurial strongman is everything boredom and uncertainty are not, someone to hate and someone to worship. We project purpose onto him. We think, finally, something happens. Behind the scenes, though, Schopenhauer's philosophy reminds us that the world of appearances is just a veil, the representation in which our minds live. We see a swashbuckling savior. The hidden will might be greed or blind rage. This mix of yearning and anxiety preys on our void. When basic needs seem at risk, jobs vanishing, neighborhoods unsafe, old certainties crumbling, the dark comfort of a tyrant's promise can look appealing. We tell ourselves he will fix things, protect us from pain. A quote in the Psychology Today piece on toxic leaders gets at this. One obvious reason is fear. Tyrants are punitive and will subjugate anyone who questions their authority. Even if that dictatorship or crackdown means fewer rights, many voters will rationalize, "I'd rather be under his boot than die on my own." Fear of chaos or enemies can override the horror of watching a leader lie or embezzle. Under the guise of security, people exchange freedom for a nightmare. Another hidden lure is the sharing of power. This sounds counterintuitive, but studies confirm it. People often support corrupt leaders because they expect to share in the spoils. Once a tyrant is in charge, his inner circle may give loyalists fat contracts, jobs, bribes, turning supporters into henchmen. Jean Lippman-Blumen's research on toxic leaders observes that some followers are happy to put their own morality on ice so long as they get a piece of the pie. In practical terms, if my team is winning, I might suffer less than if an outsider wins. A recent analysis of elections in corrupt countries notes that voters often tolerate graft in their ruling party because they expect to share in the proceeds or to be worse off under the leader from a rival party. Put simply, an indifferent or self-interested person may figure, "Well, he's stealing anyway, might as well get a kickback for my loyalty." This cold logic, better a crooked ally than a cruel enemy, fuels blind partisanship. Of course, many people justify this path by a variation of the old saying, "The ends justify the means." We look at a corrupt strongman winning policy goals we like, and we convince ourselves his sins are secondary. But this excuse is fatal. Psychology Today warns that followers who prioritize results over ethics will excuse almost anything in a leader. Too many people equate effectiveness with being good, the article says, ignoring how outcomes were achieved. This becomes a recipe for moral rot. By the time the tyranny is exposed, the people are complicit. Blind loyalty and convenient amnesia set in. Citizens tell themselves it's a temporary trade, a necessary sacrifice, until it is. Schopenhauer's dark insight into the will helps explain this cynicism. He teaches that every human motive is driven by a blind force beyond reason. We may think we're protecting our families or careers, but Schopenhauer would say our will is really feeding on dominance and prestige. The more absolute the leader's power, the more he'll indulge his base impulses. Experimentally, this is borne out. Lab studies find that simply giving someone more power causes them to act more selfishly and even corruptly. In one Swiss study, participants made leaders with more authority in a game kept far more money for themselves than lesser power leaders. In short, power itself is the crucible of corruption. Paradoxically, followers who crave order under a strongman are handing him the means to become precisely what they fear and hate. So far, we've considered personal fears, desires, and perks. Counterarguments should be addressed. Some say people aren't stupid, they simply vote for stable government. But time and again, we see educated societies undermined by populists. Others argue better someone on our side than the other party, which loops back to that tragic choice of lesser evil. At the end of the day, rational self-interest often hides vulnerability. We mask insecurity as loyalty. Rhetorically, I must ask you, does this sound like a hack or an indictment? Am I painting your neighbor as a fool? The point is, any one of us can fall into this trap. Cravings for certainty and the thrill of power are universal. Schopenhauer's philosophy forces us to confront that we all harbor the animal within. The same dark will that can make crowds roar at a tyrant is in us too. Elections and loyalty have a magnetic ritual. A voter's finger dyed with election ink, as shown above, becomes a mark of identity. Once inked, we often embrace the leader or party as part of ourselves. This tribal bond is intoxicating. It means we belong, we have a stake, and we are somebody. But it also blinds us. We stop seeing the facts clearly. In winner-takes-all systems, loyalty to one's own group can override even the most damning revelations. Scholars at the U4 Research Center explain that voters frequently tolerate corruption among leaders of their own party or ethnic group because they expect to share in the proceeds or to be worse off under the leader from a rival party. In other words, it's a grim calculation. If I can't get something from this, at least I won't lose more by letting an outsider in. The election ink image illustrates this complicit mentality. People with our ink feel justification. The other side's ink feels like betrayal. This us versus them mentality is fed by propaganda and emotional appeals. Dictatorial regimes and demagogues are masters at creating common enemies. They point to another, a minority, a foreign power, an ideological foe, and say if it weren't for them, life could be perfect under me. This scapegoating preys on frustration and blame, even if it's baseless. When reality contradicts their smooth narrative, citizens often still refuse to accept it. Hannah Arendt famously noted that the masses drawn to totalitarian movements suffer from atomization, a profound loneliness that makes them cling to simple answers. We see this in hateful chants or conspiracies. It feels good to vent rage on an enemy, so we suspend disbelief. Psychologists like Theodor Adorno analyzed this. He found that authoritarian followers often have repressed anger that gets displaced onto outgroups. People who felt powerless or resentful in life may project that onto convenient targets. If you lose a job, it's easier to blame immigrants than face systemic issues. If you feel isolated, chanting with a crowd gives a fleeting elation. This dynamic is not rational, but it's powerful. In effect, the leader channels collective anger for selfish gain. Followers then become emotionally invested. Their hatred and loyalty are two sides of the same coin. Media and information play a big role here too. In a propaganda echo chamber, dissenting facts disappear. Imagine living in a place where independent news is muzzled. Studies note that in Gabon or Zimbabwe, for example, a heavily restricted media environment means citizens literally cannot verify corruption claims. Even here in open societies, filter bubbles and sensational headlines can drown out nuance. When the truth is hidden, conspiracy grows, and when everyone around you is screaming the same slogans, it feels even more impossible to whisper doubt. From the crowd's viewpoint, all this makes perfect sense. The tribe says, "We are special, we are right, and our chosen leader alone can fix the world." Schopenhauer captured the emptiness behind this pride. He observed that the cheapest sort of pride is national pride. For if a man is proud of his own nation, it argues that he has no qualities of his own of which he can be proud. This is paraphrased from his writings. In other words, throwing our identity behind a corrupt leader is a way to avoid facing our own insecurities. It's a dark coping mechanism. Reject the pain of loneliness or failure by immersing yourself in the collective dream. Visual storytelling often drives this home. Imagine cutting to clips of soldiers marching, or patriotic songs blaring, or a quick animation of masks dropping off identical faces to reveal truth. You might show newspaper headlines morphing into each other. Our leader saves the economy becomes corruption everywhere. These visuals underscore how flimsy the veneer can be, but even strong evidence can bounce off hardened heads. Studies of groupthink show that once people have committed publicly, it's psychologically very hard to admit mistake. They rationalize or block out disconfirming facts. So here lies the second dimension, the collective illusion. The people in the crowd aren't just individuals making choices, they form a psychological organism. It has its own fears, desires, and delusions. At its core is cognitive dissonance, holding two contradictory beliefs, e.g. my guy is honest versus he's caught on tape taking bribes, makes followers uncomfortable. Psychologists note that contradictory information actually makes people feel anxious and more susceptible to authoritarian appeals. Faced with inconsistency, our ego begs for certainty. So rather than question the hero, people often swallow the inconsistency by hating the truth-tellers or doubling down on the lie. In effect, mass psychology turns us into a trance. We see enemies to blame, our in-group to exalt, and our doubts silenced by the roar of the mob. The leader's slogans become man. Traz and all of this fits neatly into Schopenhauer's model. We live in a world of representation shaped by desire. In politics, the representation is the shiny ideal of a pure nation or movement. But behind the curtain is the blind will, the raw anger, vanity, and greed. The crowd does not see that. They become entranced by what they want to see. Now ask yourself, have you ever caught yourself thinking X is dishonest, but at least he's ours? Have you ever tuned out a criticism of a candidate you like? The people cheering and the people crying in our scenario are the same species, using the same basic instincts for different identities. The stage upon which we act is universal. Schopenhauer would remind us, every man takes the limits of his own field of vision for the limits of the world. We all believe our side's vision is reality. There comes a day when the music stops and the lights go up. The corrupt leader is fully exposed. The economy is wrecked, hospitals are empty, enemies have multiplied, and the crowd's illusions shatter. But this realization is an ugly pill. For most of us, turning on the old lights is terrifying. We built our hopes on the lie. The psychological fallout is intense. Supporters face cognitive dissonance and guilt. Many respond with anger or denial. After all, admitting they were wrong means they lose face and identity. Yet facts bite anyway. Authoritarian regimes universally show the same result. They make everything worse. Research by political scientists confirms what feels obvious. Countries ruled by dictators almost always end up with worse health outcomes, a weaker economy, and more corruption than true democracies. Think about that. Voters traded checks and balances for strongmen and got starvation and hospitals in return. If security was the promised land, people find themselves in a prison instead. The institutions crumble, independent courts are stuffed with cronies, police are told to shoot dissenters, universities filled with propaganda, all while corruption grows like a cancer. Psychologically, the aftermath is devastating. Suppose you voted for a bulldozer candidate to clear the swamp, only to wake up with the swamp swallowing you. You feel foolish, betrayed, enraged, even defeated. Some switch sides and fight back. Others retreat into cynicism or apathy, believing all politicians are crooks anyway. But that attitude is dangerous too. It normalizes the corruption as inevitable and gives rise to a sense of learned helplessness. Compounding this is the cycle of blame. Rather than looking inward, people often double down on scapegoating. After the charade falls, the regime might claim enemies sabotaged them. Frustrated followers, no longer sure how to process failure, may lash out. Minorities or foreign nations are conveniently to blame. It's a brutal cycle. Failing systems ignite persecution, and persecution deepens crisis. In the meantime, the people's daily lives get worse. Schools close, goods disappear, media brainwashes further. The only solution many supporters see is to pick an even stronger leader next time, or to cleanse society of unpatriotic elements, a childish reaction that never addresses root issues. Human psychology doesn't hand over nuance easily. Cognitive dissonance strikes again. Believing he's honest takes effort, but admitting wrong would be even harder. So they stick to the dream and denounce the nightmare. As an example of how far things can go, consider a leader who boasted he'd be a dictator on day one if re-elected. Shockingly, polls showed a significant fraction of people cheering that very statement. He then began dismantling the Constitution, yet massive support remained among certain voters. This is cognitive dissonance on a national scale. Facts about police overreach and lawless actions were abundant, but many followers simply did not care. Again, fear and tribalism overwhelmed logic. It's also worth noting that power corrupts absolutely, a phrase originating in 1887 by Lord Acton and rigorously tested since. Experimental evidence strongly supports Acton's claim. In the laboratory, mere power made people more self-serving. Participants who were given more authority in a game kept significantly more money for themselves than leaders with less power. In essence, the system assured that your chosen leader would likely behave exactly like the caricature you despise if given the chance. All this leads us to a bleak transition. When rulers become ravagers, society must fend for itself in the dark. We must ask hard questions about accountability. It's not enough to hope a new election will correct everything. The path out is rocky. Fear of new instability, ingrained corruption networks, and social divisions all stand in the way. The false solutions we tried, pit one enemy against another, sacrifice our rights for security, have backfired, leaving no easy exit ramp. Before we step back to see the bigger picture, take a moment to reflect. Are you ready to challenge your own instincts? Would you honestly break with the crowd if needed? The truth about our psychology is uncomfortable, but Schopenhauer insisted on facing it. He suggested that at this point, one must either double down on delusion or seek a higher vantage through art, compassion, or truth. This is not an isolated freak show, it is a recurring cycle. Schopenhauer, though focused on individual will, was aware that societies repeat their follies. We are not the first generation to ask, why us, and not the last. Historians of all stripes, Hannah Arendt, Anne Applebaum, and many others warn that given the right conditions, any society can turn against democracy. Applebaum's plea was chillingly universal. The seeds of tyranny lie in virtually every nation. From the ancient Caesars to modern strongmen, the pattern repeats. In Rome, desperate citizens put bread in circuses above republican liberties. In the 20th century, war-weary Germans gave full powers to an unhinged Führer. In Asia and Africa, fervent crowds have cheered autocrats who later betrayed them. Around the world today, we see flickers of this trend. Populist leaders publicly scorn checks and balances, yet keep ascending in polls. Whether it's a gleeful Twitter outburst about dictatorship or rallies recalling past glories, the ingredients are alarmingly familiar. Yet the story is always told as though this time it's different. We willfully ignore history's lessons, believing ourselves immune, a dangerous arrogance. History is something we are unable to learn from, Schopenhauer might say, because our will blinds us. He famously observed that people often mistake their limited perspective for the whole truth, paraphrasing the world as will and representation. Each generation thinks it has a unique solution, a new enemy or hero. Philosophically, this invites a larger context. Schopenhauer's grim worldview, that life is suffering driven by an insatiable will, finds a parallel in our politics. The bad guys gain power because we subconsciously feed them our fear and ambitions. Modern psychologists describe this in familiar terms. Concepts like right-wing authoritarianism and collective narcissism try to capture why people idealize strongmen during crises. The core theme is the same. When people feel lonely, powerless, or humiliated, they yearn for identity and revenge. Authoritarian leaders provide both, however falsely. Looking ahead, the trend is not improving. Many democracies have grown addicted to sensationalist media, social fragmentation, and a perverse celebration of raw power. In such an environment, any angry demagogue can exploit viral outrage to seize authority. Freedom House reports that authoritarian regimes have become more effective at co-opting or circumventing the norms of liberty, even while holding pretend elections. Technology hasn't saved us because it amplifies our tribal instincts. The echo chambers that fuel corrupt leaders are not going away soon. Where does this leave us? Schopenhauer's philosophy offers a somber takeaway. The individual cannot rely on politics or institutions to fix our nature. In his view, only self-awareness and compassion break the cycle. He wrote that true morality emerges from feeling another's suffering as one's own. In practical terms, this means the antidote to adoring a cruel leader is recognizing our shared humanity with others, even those we label enemies. It means questioning every appealing narrative and acknowledging uncomfortable truths about ourselves. So we stand at a crossroads. Either perpetuate the myth that strongmen are saviors, or accept that history's darkest chapters can begin with any of us. The future need not repeat the past, but it will unless we change. We began with a simple yet haunting question. Why do people adore corrupt leaders? As we've seen, the answer is woven into our own hearts and minds. The first insight is psychological. Under stress, we look for powerful protectors, often mistaking arrogance for strength. We share in the leader's power, we rationalize the immoral means, and we give them the benefit of the doubt. Secondly, we observe the communal dimension. Crowds create collective illusions. Propaganda and tribal identity blind us to facts. Cognitive dissonance makes truth unbearable. We saw how Schopenhauer's concept of the will, blind desire at the core of all things, manifests as our cravings for meaning and dominance. Third, we confronted the consequences. Choosing corruption usually ends in worse misery, yet in the moment the crowd clutches hope over truth. The core message is this: the problem isn't them, it's us. The corrupt leader is a reflection of our deepest fears and desires. Every time we cheer a thug in velvet, we validate our own dark side. Shifting blame outward is comforting but ultimately cowardly. Schopenhauer would challenge us: can we endure the truth of our nature and act with wisdom? His dark philosophy wasn't meant to leave us hopeless, it was meant to wake us up. So I issue this final challenge: look in the mirror. Next time a charismatic figure promises an easy fix, ask yourself what void you're hoping to fill. When the crowd around you cheers, consider why you feel compelled. If you ever catch a whiff of agreement with slogans that demonize others, pause and reflect. Real change doesn't come from giving unchecked power to one man, but from steady vigilance and questioning. If this video unsettled you, good, that's the point. Reflect on these insights, share your thoughts below, and maybe, just maybe, we'll break the cycle before the next dictator takes the stage. In the words of Schopenhauer, the first step toward truth is an unflinching confrontation with the darkness within us all. Will you face it?